The sand burned beneath their feet. The air itself tasted like smoke. Nahil stumbled first, one hand clutching her younger sister's arm, the other pressed against her chest where the air refused to come. The wind howled across the desert plain, carrying with it the echo of screams and the crackling of flames that still devoured what had been their village. They had run since dawn, 5 shadows against an ocean of dust. Ayana limped, her shoulder torn open by a bullet. Kaya sobbed quietly, her small fingers digging into the charred doll she refused to leave behind. Every breath hurt. Every step was a prayer they didn't believe in anymore. When the horizon shimmered with the outline of a barn, Nahile thought it was another mirage. Her lips were split, her tongue swollen. She fell to her knees, the taste of blood mixing with sand. "Don't let me die of thirst," she whispered, her voice no louder than the wind. "They burned our village." The others froze around her, hollow-eyed, too weak to cry. From the shadow of the barn, a man stepped out. Dust clung to his clothes, soot marked his hands. His eyes, gray, like storm clouds that never rained, locked onto the girls crawling toward the trough. Elias Rowan hadn't spoken to another soul in months. He had sworn never to touch a weapon again. Yet as he watched the 5 broken figures reach for the dry earth, something inside him, the part that still remembered the smell of fire and guilt, woke like a wound tearing open. And for the first time in years, he moved. Elias Rowan hadn't meant to leave his forge burning that morning. The fire was the only thing that ever spoke back to him. A hiss, a breath, a reminder that something still lived. But when he saw the 5 girls collapse by the trough, the hammer slipped from his hand, and the world outside the anvil suddenly mattered again. He moved cautiously, boots crunching over the dry soil. The eldest girl, Nahil, turned her head, her dark eyes sharp even in weakness. She didn't trust him, none of them did. Fear and defiance mixed in their faces, and for a moment Elias almost stopped. He'd seen that same look before, years ago, on faces he never forgot. "Water." Nahil rasped. He nodded once, wordless. Inside the barn, the water barrel stood half full, the last of what he'd drawn from the old well. He filled a tin cup, hands trembling slightly, not from the weight, but from the memory of another cup, long ago, offered to a dying child in a burning village. When he returned, Kaya reached for it first. Her fingers were shaking so badly the cup slipped, splashing the dust. Elias knelt, lowered the cup himself, steadying her small hands. She drank greedily, gasping between swallows. One by one, he gave them water. Ayana's shoulder was bleeding through the torn cloth. He tore a strip from his sleeve and wrapped it tightly. The others watched, ready to run if he so much as raised his voice. He didn't. He couldn't. "Why? Why are you helping us?" Taji asked. Her voice cracked with suspicion. Elias looked past her, toward the smoke curling on the horizon. "Because no one helped when it was my turn to stop it." They didn't understand the meaning. Not yet. He stood, wiped his hands on his trousers, and pointed toward the open doors of the barn. "You can stay inside tonight," he said quietly. "The wind gets colder after sunset." Nahela hesitated. "What do you want in return?" "Nothing." The word came out too fast, too bitter. He cleared his throat. "Just don't light a fire. The soldiers patrol the ridge." As the sun bled out over the desert, the girls lay among the hay bales, too tired to speak. Elias sat outside by the forge, staring at the dying coals. The iron in his hands glowed faintly, like old guilt refusing to cool. He could still hear the past, the orders shouted, the screams swallowed by flame, the ringing of hammers shaping weapons that should never have been made. Now, just beyond his broken fence, the victims of that same fire were breathing under his roof. When the wind shifted, it carried the faintest sound of Ayana humming a melody he recognized from the day the world turned red. And for the first time in years, Elias closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, not for forgiveness, but for a chance to try again. The night came slowly to Cedar Hollow, thick with heat and silence. Inside the barn, the air smelled of hay, rust, and fear. The 5 girls lay close together beneath a blanket Elias had thrown over them. Every creak of wood made them flinch. Every gust of wind sounded like soldiers on horseback. Elias sat outside by the forge, a dark silhouette against the dying glow. He hadn't touched the hammer since they arrived. The fire whispered, daring him to pick it up again, but he stayed still. His hands rested on his knees, blackened with soot and guilt. From inside, a faint voice broke the quiet. Iana the Wounded One was humming again. The melody was low and trembling, but it filled the night like a heartbeat. Elias recognized the tune. It was the same chant he'd heard years ago, when he stood on a ridge and watched flames devour an Apache village. The sound reached him then, through smoke and screams. Now, it reached him through the stillness, the same song, but surviving. He closed his eyes. Maybe the earth remembers who tried to kill it, he thought. Nahila stepped out of the barn, her shadow long under the moonlight. Her hair hung loose, her face pale but steady. "You're not sleeping," she said quietly. Elias shook his head. "I don't sleep much." She hesitated before sitting on a barrel a few steps away. "We'll leave when my sister can walk." He nodded. "I know. You don't ask who we are," she said after a pause. "You don't ask who I am either." Their eyes met not with trust, but with something heavier, something that came from recognizing another soul marked by loss. After a while, Nahil spoke again, her voice almost a whisper. "Our father told us the earth breathes. When it stops breathing, the fire comes to wake it up. That's what happened to our village. The earth stopped breathing." Elias looked down at his hands. "Then maybe I'm the one who choked it." Nahil didn't answer. The wind carried a thin layer of ash through the air. Somewhere far off, a coyote howled, the kind of sound that reminded you how small you were in the desert. When Naheli returned inside, Elias finally rose. He walked to the edge of his field, where the well stood, a circle of cracked stones long since dry. He knelt beside it, running his palm along the rough edge. "Breathe," he murmured to the earth. Just once more. The air was still, but something deep beneath him groaned, faint and tired, like a memory trying to wake. Back in the barn, the girls slept. Their breaths, uneven but alive, rose and fell in rhythm. And in that fragile sound, that soft, human proof of survival, Elias heard the first sign of forgiveness he'd ever been given. Morning came pale and brittle. The desert wind scraped against the barn's walls, carrying the scent of dust and iron. Elias Rowan stood by the forge, watching smoke twist from the coals he'd relit for the first time in weeks. His hands moved without thought, feeding the fire, testing the bellows, pretending there was still a reason to make anything in a place that had forgotten warmth. Behind him, Nahil's footsteps were soft but wary. "You work with fire," she said, her voice still hoarse from thirst. He didn't look at her. "Used to." "What do you make?" "Tools, horseshoes, sometimes knives." He hesitated, eyes fixed on the ember's glow. "Once. Weapons." Nahili studied the forge. The heat made her eyes water, but she didn't step back. "Our people used to say fire was a spirit," she murmured. "It gives, and it takes." Elias smiled faintly. "Then it's more honest than most men." For the first time, she almost smiled too, but stopped herself. The silence between them stretched, heavy with things neither wanted to remember. Inside the barn, the others stirred. Ayana's fever had broken, her shoulder bound neatly in white cloth torn from Elias's own shirt. Kaya, the youngest, was humming quietly as she brushed hay from her doll. Even Taji, the fiercest among them, had softened enough to accept the bread Elias left on the table. By noon, the sun was merciless. The roof of the forge shimmered with heat, and the old well behind the barn sat silent, cracked open like a wound. Elias knelt beside it, scraping the sand away from its edges. He didn't expect to find water. He just needed something to do with his hands. Nahila joined him again, a faint tremor in her step. "It's dry," she said. "It's been dry for years," he answered. "But I dig anyway." She frowned. "Why?" "Because I once helped bury too much," he said quietly. Her breath caught, but she didn't question him further. Instead, she crouched beside him and began to dig too. The earth was hot, unforgiving. For every handful of dust they pulled, it felt like the desert swallowed twice as much. After a long silence, Nahil noticed something glinting in the dirt. A small, rusted shard of metal. She picked it up and held it to the light. The edges were jagged, the surface scarred with faint markings. "What is this?" Elias froze. He recognized it instantly. The piece had once been part of a ceremonial blade one he'd forged years ago for a captain stationed at Fort Wallace. That captain had led the raid that burned half a dozen Apache villages. "It's just scrap," Elias said, his voice too calm. Nahili turned it over in her palm. "It's from a sword." He forced himself to look at her. "Then maybe it's better left buried." Her eyes lingered on him, searching for truth in his face. The heat pressed around them, filling the silence with a pulse of mistrust. Finally, she slipped the rusted shard into her belt. "Sometimes the earth gives back what men tried to hide," she said, and walked away. Elias stayed by the well until the sun sank low, staring at the hole they'd made. He could still see her hand closing around that rusted piece of iron. It was nothing, a fragment, but somehow it felt heavier than anything he'd carried from the war. When darkness fell, the girls lit a single lantern inside the barn. Ayanna sang softly, her voice like wind moving through broken glass. Elias sat outside, his hands blackened by dirt, the forge behind him fading to ash. The well was still dry, but for the first time, he thought he heard something faint below the surface. A whisper, a breath, like water remembering its way back home. The days passed like ghosts. Morning light bled pale through the cracks of the barn, painting the girls' faces in muted gold. Elias Rowan rose before dawn, the same way he had in the army, out of habit, not hope. The forge was cold again. He didn't bother lighting it. The sound of hammering felt too much like memory. Instead, he went to the well. Every morning, he scraped more sand from its walls, deeper and deeper into nothing. The girls thought he was searching for water. In truth, he was digging for forgiveness. Nahil watched him from the doorway, arms crossed, her dark hair tangled by wind. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Elias could feel her questions hanging in the air, questions he wasn't ready to answer. By midday, the desert shimmered. The horizon wavered like liquid glass. Kaya sat in the shade of the trough, drawing circles in the dust. "The sky's too quiet," she whispered to Ayanna. "Maybe the rain forgot us." Ayanna, her wound still bandaged, smiled faintly. "The rain doesn't forget. It waits until someone asks the right way." Tazi snorted. "And what's the right way?" Ayanna's eyes drifted toward Elias. "Maybe the man who owes something to the fire should be the one to ask." That afternoon, Elias heard them whispering. He said nothing. He simply took the shovel again and kept digging. Each strike of metal against dirt sent a dull echo through his bones. The earth was dry, dead. Yet every time he hit rock, he swore he could hear a hollow sound beneath a promise, or maybe a lie. When he paused to catch his breath, Nahil stepped forward with a bucket. "You'll die out here before you find anything," she said. Elias wiped the sweat from his brow. "I've died before," he muttered. She frowned. "You talk like a ghost." "Maybe I am." For a moment, their eyes met hers, alive with anger, his dulled by remorse. Then she knelt beside him, scooping dirt with her bare hands. "Fine. Two ghosts dig faster than one." The hours dragged. Dust coated their skin like a second layer of shame. When the sun began to sink, the others joined, and even Kaya, small and trembling, clutching her broken doll in one hand while she passed the shovel with the other. They dug until the last light disappeared. When the shovel struck something hollow, Elias froze. The sound was different this time, sharp, resonant, like the echo of a heart still beating under the ground. He dropped to his knees, brushed away the sand. It wasn't water. It was metal. A dented canteen, blackened by soot. The kind issued to soldiers. Elias's stomach turned. His hand shook as he lifted it, recognizing the faded initials carved into its side: C.W. Captain Wallace, the officer he once served under. The man who led the raid. Nahil's voice broke the silence. "You knew him." Elias couldn't speak. The earth had given back more than he'd asked for. He hurled the canteen into the distance. It clanged against a rock, rolled into the sand, and vanished. "Some things shouldn't come back," he said. His voice cracked like old iron. The girls didn't argue. They returned to the barn in silence. When the night fell, Ayanna began her song again, the one about rain returning to the earth. Her voice trembled at first, then grew stronger, echoing beyond the barn walls. Elias sat outside, staring at the dry well. He didn't pray, he just listened. And somewhere, between the rhythm of her song and the pulse beneath the sand, he thought he heard something shift deep, hidden, a sigh from the sleeping earth. Maybe the rain hadn't forgotten them after all. The next morning dawned red, the kind of red that never meant peace. Clouds gathered low over Cedar Hollow, but they carried no rain, only heat and dust. Elias Rowan woke to the sound of voices outside the barn. Harsh, unfamiliar. He reached for the rifle hidden behind the door, the one he swore he'd never touch again. When he stepped out, 3 riders waited near the fence line. Their coats bore the faded insignia of the Frontier Patrol. The man in front, lean and sharp-eyed, reined in his horse and spat into the dirt. "Rowan," he said, "heard talk you've been harboring runaways." Elias stood silent. The shovel still leaned against the dry well, the ground freshly disturbed. Behind the barn door, he knew the girls were listening, breaths held tight. "Runaways?" he asked evenly. "Apache girls," the man said. 5 of them escaped from the camp up north. Town folks said they saw smoke from your forge last night." Elias glanced toward the horizon. The forge, damn it. He had forgotten to shut the flue. The glow would have been visible for miles. "Was fixing a plow," he said quietly. The patrolman smirked. "Right. You fixin' plows now, after you walked out on Fort Wallace? Hell of a change, blacksmith." At the sound of that name, Elias felt his chest tighten. "Fort Wallace has got nothing to do with me anymore." "Maybe not," the man replied, leaning forward in the saddle. "But the captain you worked under would have liked to know you're sheltering his enemies." The world went still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "I ain't sheltering anyone," Elias said at last. The man studied him for a long moment, then nudged his horse closer. "If you're lying, Rowan, we'll burn what's left of this place. You remember how that's done, don't you?" The words cut deep, sharper than any blade. Elias's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. The riders turned, dust swirling behind them, and disappeared over the ridge. When the sound of hooves faded, Naheli emerged from the barn. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. "They'll come back," she said. "I know. You lied for us." Elias nodded slowly. "I've done worse things for worse men." She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time saw the exhaustion behind his stillness, the ghosts crowding his silence. "Who were you?" she asked. "Someone I shouldn't have been," he said. Inside, Ayana whispered to the others, trying to calm Kaya's tears. The youngest clung to her doll, whispering that the fire was coming again. That night, Elias sat alone by the forge. The air was heavy, the wind cruel. He couldn't stop seeing the patrolman's face or hearing his words. "You remember how that's done?" "Yes, Hay did. Too well." When Nahela approached, he didn't turn. "You should go," he said. "Head east, travel by night. They'll search this place by tomorrow." "And you?" "I'll stay. If they find me, maybe they'll stop looking." She shook her head. "No. If they burn this place, they'll burn you with it. We won't leave you behind." Elias met her gaze, anger, defiance, and something else flickering there. He wanted to tell her that she didn't understand, that he didn't deserve saving. But the words refused to come. Instead, he said softly, "Then you'd better be ready to fight for a ghost." Nahela didn't flinch. "We already are." Outside, the wind rose again, whipping dust into the air like smoke. Far off in the distance, a single flash lit the horizon, not lightning, but a torch. The shadow of hatred was coming. Night cloaked Cedar Hollow in uneasy silence. The girls huddled in the barn, whispering among themselves while the forge crackled faintly outside. Elias Rowan sat by its light, sharpening a broken hoe just to keep his hands busy. Every scrape of steel sounded like confession. The patrol would return by morning, he knew that now. There was no outrunning suspicion once the town started talking. Yet what haunted him more than their arrival was Nahil's gaze, steady and searching, as if she already saw the truth he'd buried beneath years of silence. Inside, the girls were restless. Kaya dreamed and cried softly. Ayana sang half a verse before her voice broke. It was Taji who finally stood and opened the chest near Elias's workbench, looking for something, anything that might prove who this man really was. Her fingers brushed against cold metal. She pulled it out into the lantern light. A metal dull with age, but unmistakable. An eagle engraved above the words. Fort Wallace, for bravery and service. The others crowded around, breath caught in their throats. Ayanna whispered first. That's a soldier's mark. Tazi's eyes narrowed. No, that's the mark of the fire that killed our fathers. Nahele said nothing. She stepped outside, the metal clenched in her hand. Elias looked up as she approached, his face shadowed by the forge's dying light. Where did you get this? She asked, voice trembling but sharp. He stared at the metal, then at her. For a long time, he didn't speak. Finally, he exhaled. It was mine. The words dropped heavy between them. You were one of them, she said. Not a question, a sentence. Elias didn't deny it. I was a blacksmith in the regiment. I made their blades, their torches. I built the things that burned your village. Tazi had followed her out. Her voice cracked like a whip. You killed our people. No, Elias said quickly, standing. I didn't light the fires, but you gave them the tools to do it. Taji screamed, tears streaking her face. The night wind tore through the barn, scattering hay like ashes. Elias didn't defend himself. He couldn't. The truth was a wound he'd carried for years, and now it bled freely before them. Nahil's hand shook. You helped them destroy us. Why save us now? Because I can't stand to see it happen again, he whispered. Because every time I close my eyes, I still see what I made. The forge behind him flickered, the coals dimming to embers. The orange glow cut across his face, half man, half ghost. Ayanna stepped forward, her expression soft but haunted. Do you believe saving 5 girls will wash away the blood of hundreds? Elias met her eyes. No, but it's all I have left to try. The barn fell silent except for the hiss of the forge. Nahil turned away, her voice low and unsteady. We should leave before dawn. He nodded. I'll help you pack. But none of them moved. The air between them was too thick with everything unspoken grief, anger, disbelief. When Nahile finally looked back, her expression had changed. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something quieter, heavier. You can't undo what you did, she said. But maybe you can die trying to make it right. Elias didn't flinch. Then I'll stay alive long enough to start. She handed him the metal. He stared at it for a moment, then tossed it into the forge. The metal sizzled, melted, vanished into the fire. The flames leapt higher, bright and furious as if the past itself had screamed, then turned to silence. Outside, the first drops of rain hit the roof, dry and hesitant, not enough to cleanse, but enough to remind them that the sky still remembered. The rain didn't last. It came and went like mercy, one brief sigh from the clouds, then nothing but silence. By morning, the desert steamed under the heat again, and the ground swallowed every drop as if thirstier than before. Inside the barn, the girls packed their few belongings, scraps of cloth, dried corn. The doll Kaya refused to leave. Nahila moved quietly, her face set. The decision had been made during the night. They would leave Cedar Hollow before sunset. Elias Rowan watched from the doorway, shoulders heavy with exhaustion. He wanted to stop them, but what right did he have? He'd built the fires that turned their lives to ash. Keeping them here would only chain them to the same guilt that already strangled him. Nahil broke the silence first. We'll head south, she said flatly. There's an old trail along the ridge. Maybe we can find the river. He nodded. You'll need food. Take what's in the cellar. Taji refused to meet his eyes. We don't want your charity. It's not charity, he said softly. It's a debt. No one answered. The sound of the wind filled the space between them. Then Ayanna stepped forward, her arm still bandaged, her voice calm but firm. You could come with us. Elias blinked, unsure he'd heard right. She continued. You said you wanted to make things right. That doesn't happen hiding behind a forge. Tazi's jaw tightened. You want to walk beside the man who made the torches that burned us? Ayanna turned to her. Maybe that's the only way we ever stop burning. The words hung in the air, soft but fierce. Nahile looked from one sister to the other. The anger in her chest pulsed, but so did something else, fatigue, perhaps, or the fragile start of understanding. We leave before dusk, she said. If he wants to follow, he'll have to keep up. Elias exhaled slowly. He hadn't expected an invitation, not even a reluctant one. I don't deserve it, he said. No, Nahil replied, but neither did we deserve what you gave us. The rest of the day passed in uneasy quiet. Elias worked by the forge one last time, not to make weapons or tools, but to shape a cross of iron. He didn't know why. Maybe it was a marker for the grave of his past, or for the faith he'd long since buried. When it cooled, he planted it beside the dry well, the metal catching the last light of day. As dusk fell, the horizon flared orange. Elias felt it before he saw it, the vibration of hooves, the echo of men's voices. He stepped outside, eyes narrowing. Riders again. The same patrol, dust rising behind them. Nahele saw them too. They're coming back, she said. Elias grabbed his coat. Get to the back trail. Take the horses, Taji protested. And leave you here? He loaded a single round into his rifle. If they catch us together, they'll kill you all. If they only find me, maybe they'll think the story ended here. Ayana gripped his arm. You can't fight them alone. I won't, he said. I'll just slow them down. The girls hesitated. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, closer. Nahel finally made the call. Go. Ayana pulled Kaya onto a horse. Taji helped the others mount. They turned toward the ridge, hearts hammering. Elias stayed behind, the rifle steady in his hands. The sun sank lower, painting his figure in molten gold. As the riders crested the hill, he glanced once at the cross by the well. For the first time, he didn't see it as a grave but as a promise. He raised the rifle and stepped forward into the light, the wind whipping his coat, the horizon burning red like the memory of every fire he'd ever lit. The past was coming for him, but this time, he wouldn't run. The sun vanished behind the ridge, leaving Cedar Hollow drowned in a rust-colored dusk. Dust clouds rolled across the horizon, an omen of men and fire. Elias Rowan stood by the barn, the rifle gripped loosely in his hands, listening to the growing thunder of hooves. He had heard that sound too many times before. Once, it meant orders. Now, it meant reckoning. The patrol emerged from the twilight like phantoms, 6 riders, their torches swaying, their faces hidden under wide-brimmed hats. At their head rode the same officer as before, the scarred man from Fort Wallace, Captain Dyer. Well, Dyer called out, reining his horse. Didn't take you long to fall back into old habits, Rowan. Heard you've been keeping company with savages. Elias didn't answer. His voice was buried somewhere deep, where words turned to stone. Dyer dismounted, circling him with the slow arrogance of a man who had once owned other men's fates. You were a fine soldier, he said. Shame you started thinking you had a conscience. I'm no soldier, Elias replied quietly. Not anymore. Maybe not, but you still know how to build a fire. Dyer motioned to the others. Burn it, all of it. Elias stepped between them in the barn. No. One of the younger riders laughed. You planning to shoot all of us? Elias didn't raise the rifle. Only the first one who moves. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then Dyer's smile faded. You draw on your own kind? For a handful of squaws? They're not my kind, Elias said, voice steady. Not anymore. The captain's eyes hardened. Then you die with them. He signaled his men. 2 dismounted, moving toward the barn. Elias fired. The shot cracked through the valley, echoing like thunder. One man dropped instantly, clutching his shoulder. The horses screamed, rearing back. Take him, Dyer roared. The night exploded into chaos. Bullets struck the barn walls, sending splinters through the air. Inside, Nahele and the others clung together, their hearts pounding like war drums. Ayana grabbed Nahele's wrist. We can't just wait. Nahil's mind raced. Elias had told them to flee, but the thought of leaving him alone under that storm felt like betrayal. She looked toward the back wall, the small window near the corral. Tazi, help me lift Kaya. We're getting out. Outside, Elias reloaded, ducking behind the trough as shots tore through the dust. His shoulder burn grazed, but he kept firing. For every man that advanced, he forced 2 to retreat. But he was running out of bullets and time. From the darkness behind him, he heard Nahila's voice. Elias. He turned. The girls were slipping out through the corral gate, moving toward the dry creek. Nahile stood last, the firelight flickering on her face. Go, he shouted. She shook her head. You said you wouldn't run. Neither will I. The torchlight caught her eyes fierce, defiant. Elias felt something twist in his chest, a kind of fear he hadn't felt since the war. Not of dying, but of someone else dying for him. Then a gunshot split the air. Nahil cried out and fell to her knees. Elias dropped the rifle, running to her as another bullet whistled past. He reached her side, pulling her behind the well-stone rim. I told you to go, he said, voice shaking. I couldn't, she whispered. Blood trickled down her arm, but her gaze was steady. We finished this together. Elias looked over the edge of the well, the torchlight closing in. The smell of smoke filled the air again, the smell of the past repeating itself. He gritted his teeth, raised the rifle one last time, and whispered, then together it is. As the flames spread through the barn, Elias fired into the night not to kill, but to buy one more breath, one more second of life for the girls escaping through the shadows. The desert wind screamed, the fire roared, and the ghosts of Fort Wallace came to claim what was left of him. The night turned red. Flames climbed the barn walls, devouring the dry wood with a hunger that roared louder than the gunfire. Smoke rolled through Cedar Hollow, thick and black, choking the stars from the sky. Elias Rowan pulled Nahil behind the well, pressing his hand to her arm to stop the bleeding. Stay down, he said. She tried to speak, but the words drowned under the crack of another rifle. Sparks rained over them. The air burned. Dyer's men advanced through the smoke, their torches glowing like angry suns. End it, Rowan, the captain shouted. You can't save them. You never could. Elias rose halfway, the rifle shaking in his grip. You're right, he said, but I can stop you. He fired. The shot hit the torch in Dyer's hand, scattering flame and oil across the ground. For a moment, the fire turned on its masters. Horses reared, men cursed, and one stumbled screaming into the blaze. The desert swallowed his voice. Elias dragged Naheli toward the trough, using it for cover. Her face was pale, sweat shining under the firelight. You'll burn, she murmured. I already did, he said. The barn's roof caved in with a deafening crack. Embers sprayed across the yard, lighting the old fence and the wagon. The dry well glowed red at its edge, the stones reflecting the inferno. From the ridge came a sudden shout. Ayanna and the others, returning despite his orders. They had looped around through the creek, carrying buckets filled with muddy water. Elias, Ayanna yelled, throwing the first bucket into the flames. It hissed uselessly, swallowed by heat. We can't leave you. He waved them off. Get her to safety, he shouted, pointing at Nahil. Go. Tazi hesitated, tears streaking through the soot on her cheeks. Not without you. A bullet struck the ground near her feet. Elias turned and fired back, hitting the man who had shot. His rifle clicked empty. No more bullets. Dyer, limping now, advanced with a pistol drawn. You should have stayed a blacksmith, he sneered. That was the only thing you were good at. Elias stepped between him and the girls. I was never good at making weapons, he said, but I learned how to end one. He grabbed the lantern beside the trough and hurled it. The glass shattered at Dyer's feet, igniting the spilled oil. The captain's scream split the night as fire climbed his coat. Elias turned back toward the girls. Run? They did. Ayanna and Taji lifted Nahila between them, dragging her toward the creek. Kaya looked back just once, and saw Elias standing amid the fire, his silhouette framed by the collapsing barn. For a heartbeat, he seemed carved from flame, part of the same blaze he had once unleashed upon others. Then the wind shifted, and the fire took him too. Behind them, the barn fell in on itself. The second fire of Cedar Hollow burned until dawn, not of hate this time, but of redemption. Dawn crept over Cedar Hollow like a fragile mercy. The fire had died, leaving only smoke rising from the ruins. The air smelled of ash and wet earth. Somewhere in the distance, a single crow called not mourning, not warning, just bearing witness. Nahile woke by the dry creek, her arm bound, her head resting on Ayanna's lap. The others were there, Taji, Kaya, and the wounded Ayanna, exhausted but alive. Their clothes were blackened, their faces streaked with soot. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Nahile asked the question they all feared. Elias? No one answered. The silence said enough. They returned to what was left of the ranch. The barn was gone, nothing but a skeleton of charred beams. The forge was a mound of melted iron. And near the well, what had once been a hollow of dust, stood something strange. Water. It shimmered faintly between the stones, bubbling up from a place that had been dry for decades. Steam curled gently above it, like the earth itself exhaled after holding its breath too long. Kaya was the first to move. She knelt, touching the surface with her fingers. "It's warm," she whispered, "like it's alive." Nahil approached slowly. The cross of iron Elias had forged still stood beside the well, bent but unbroken. She touched it, feeling the roughness of his work, the weight of what it meant. He said he'd dig until it breathed again. Ayana murmured. Nahil's throat tightened. He did. They filled a bucket and poured the first water over the burned ground. The ashes hissed and darkened, releasing the scent of life beneath the ruin. Taji pressed her hand to the soil. "It's soft," she said in disbelief. "It's healing." For hours, they worked clearing debris, gathering the few tools that survived, feeding the land with the new water. The wind shifted, cooler now, carrying the faint smell of rain that might finally come. As the sun climbed, Nahil stood at the edge of the well, her gaze far away. "He stayed because he couldn't live with what he did," she said quietly. "But maybe he didn't die with it either." Ayana nodded, her eyes glistening. "The earth forgave him before we could." They buried what was left of his rifle beside the cross, not as a weapon, but as a marker of change. Kaya placed her small doll on top, whispering something only the wind could hear. By evening, the first green shoots appeared near the edge of the field, small and defiant. Nahil looked toward the horizon, the place where the desert ended and the mountains began. "We'll stay," she said. "This land took everything from us. Now we'll make it give something back." Ayana smiled faintly. "The water came from his hands. The rest will come from ours." As the last light faded, the well rippled softly, reflecting the first stars of a clean sky. And for the first time in years, Cedar Hollow breathed again, alive, forgiven, and whole.